Hi, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In the past, I've read from some of my vast collection of photography magazines. I thought I'd do another one of those today. Haven't done one for a while and I've still got heaps of photography magazines. So today we're going to take a walk back in time to December 1993, and this was the edition that came out then of Professional Photos, an Australian photography magazine. Quite a large, almost an A3 size format. It was in different sizes, this particular magazine. I used to get them on a regular basis. I don't buy too many magazines these days. I used to buy about one or two a week at one stage. So anyway, I just thought I'd grab a few things out of here to share with you about what was happening back in then. I'll give you some of the headlines here that they were talking about. Well, they have the normal news, Australian Institute of Professional Photographers and the New Zealand News, assistance, tax and superannuation, some books reviews for Christmas reading back then, copyright, what does it really mean, on review, the Kodak Ektachrome Select 100, and they're raving about the performance of Kodak's latest E6 emulsion. Practical classics, that's the one I would like to talk about a little bit. I'll share some of that with you. Screw thread Leicas. Is a screw thread rangefinder the best possible combination for a working camera? Brian Woodward, who wrote the article, argues that there's a lot going for this design in terms of flexibility and versatility. There are heaps of Leica fans around the world, of course, and collectors. I've often wished I would have had one, particularly some of the later ones, not the early ones that these are talking about, but maybe the more SLR type looking ones. I would like to have one of those. And professional 35mm camera practice. In recognition of the 35mm format's growing importance in imaging, Tony Martirano, the late Tony Martirano, and he died quite young, he was a regular writer in this magazine, kicks off a new series of articles which will examine many aspects and applications of 35mm photography. And the argument used to be going back then, and he'll elaborate on that when I read in a minute, that 35mm wasn't professionals. If you were a professional, you needed to shoot medium format. Well, we'll have a read of that. So let's go back to the screw thread Leicas. I'll only read some of this. It's a big article. If anyone's ever interested in these, I can always PDF them and photocopy them and send them to you, the whole articles. There's a bit of a big ad there for Ilford XB2 black and white, which was my favourite film for weddings, for black and white, and that's what this photographer was saying here too, that they really loved that film. So this was a part of this article here, Getting Your Backup, part 8. They were doing regular, in this magazine and another magazine, regular reviews of the practical classics, of the classic film cameras of old, because these cameras were the vintage ones back even then in 1993. So there we go, in the footsteps of Henry Cartier-Bresson. And then over here, those ones there, I'll get my hand out the road, where is it? It's all back to front. I'd be no good shooting a twin lens reflex camera, which I do have. I'll just get up here. No, I think I'll give it up. So there is a Russian made Fed copy of a Leica 2 I was trying to show you. Canon, that was built between 1953 and 1955, and its coated 50mm f3.5 lens is very sharp indeed. Then it was Canon's 1954 4SB, arguably better than the Leica at the same period because of Canon's wider range of lenses. And then there was the Minolta 35, was probably unequalled in build quality, but it had a limited range of lenses. Today it's rare and expensive. I wonder what that would be right now. Anyway, I'll read you some of this article here. Leica's 42mm screw thread coupled rangefinder miniature camera. 35mm cameras were called miniature cameras back in the day. Miniature camera inspired Henry Cartier-Bresson. It also inspired more than 130 copies. Brian Woodward, who has been, I'll just move over here, who has been married 3 times, finds out which is best. That's what they wrote in the article, and that'll make sense now when I read this. Because Brian Woodward says, like marriages, camera designs take 3 attempts before they get it right. Hopefully he did. Leica started with the Model 1, which made everybody all sit up and take notice. Then came the Model 2, which lured the copycats into a frenzy of Leica lookalikes. By the time Leica introduced the Model 3, the imitators were working on variations of their own designs. Yet the Model 3 is the Leica which now is most affordable, most usable, and most often found in the second-hand shops. The Model 3 Leica lacks the scarcity of the Model 1, the collectability of the Model 2, and the user premium which always seems to be placed against the price sticker of an M series. Yet the Model 3 in its various forms is probably the most usable screw thread Leica. But first, here's a simple method of finding your way through the Leica maze of model numbers, which should probably be subtitled How to Tell the Difference Between a 2C and a 3G. Background and history. There are 3 screw thread Leicas, the 1, 2 and 3. The 1 has no rangefinder, the 2 has a coupled rangefinder, and the 3 has a slow shutter speed dial on the front. Within these 3 basic categories of Leica, there have been different models as the years have passed. These have been tagged as A, B, C, F and G. Leica's 1 first appeared in 1925. The 2, the first Leica with a coupled rangefinder, went on sale in 1932, and the 3 with the slow shutter speeds in 1933. The 3A started in 1935 and the 3B the following year. These are easily identified because the rangefinder is in a separate metal pressed housing on top of the body. I could go on and on with all this. The Leica, the screw thread concept became universal, so you don't have to limit yourself to the Leica brand name. Many popular post-war Japanese and German lenses in Leica screw thread size perform very well indeed. I was talking about wide and telephoto lenses need accessory viewfinders on these cameras. Most cameras shop junk boxes have the cheap Japanese wide and telefinders which come with accessory lenses in the 1960s. Most cost about $1. Wow. These are a more practical alternative to paying $50 to $195 for a genuine Leica viewfinder. I wonder what the prices are like for these things these days. So there were copious copies of all the different cameras. I'm not going to go into all of it. Putting it into practice. Can you live with a screw thread Leica? There's a whole lot of interesting stuff there. That little part of this article finishes off. It says, always lock it on infinity after shooting, as it is better to remove and fit lenses with the lenses locked than to permit the full extension of the helix to carry the weight of unscrewing the lens. Well, there you go. That's something I didn't know. Have a look at these here. These are showing the different, spot the family likenesses from top to bottom. There's a Leica 3C, a Fed, which was the Russian one, the Shanghai, obviously Chinese, Canon and Minolta. These are 5 variations. The Leica starts off at the top and then you go down through those others of what those lookalike cameras look like. There you go, look at that. They are very similar, aren't they? Just let you have a good look. Come in a little bit closer maybe. Go in there. Let's go up. So, it says here, post-war Canons vie with the Leica on price, but the range of Canon lenses is more comprehensive than Leica's and probably as good optically. So there you go, that's some food for thought if you're thinking of getting into Leicas. Contact me if you want a PDF copy of that. I'll do you a PDF copy of that whole article. Now, this was an article I found here interesting, Reaching Your Wedding Market. This was a guy in, where was he? California, I think, or somewhere. San Jose, California. American photographer John Paulson, and he was into weddings at the time, but I looked him up, he's still going, and he has a website, but he doesn't seem to be doing weddings anymore. But anyway, what he was doing to market his weddings was to send out postcards, which was these little things here. Of course, these days we don't do too much of that now. We've got the internet and our websites and all the every social media under the sun to market our weddings. I'm trying to find this bit about the 35mm. Here it is. Here we go. Where's that there? False impressions, that says there. I'll just read out a little introduction to this article because it was a question that I was asking myself when I first started off doing weddings in 1975. I only had 35mm equipment, but people were telling me I should have medium format, and I did get into medium format, and I used it on some weddings, but mostly I used 35mm. So this is what Tony is saying. In recognition of the 35mm format's increasing performance potential and importance, Tony Martirano introduces a new series of articles which will examine many aspects of applying the so-called amateur format to professional applications. He says, while I was waiting for a bus the other day, a young man walked up and sat down beside me. A battered and brassy Nikon hung from his shoulder. The worn string of a well-used Lunar 6 dangled from a pocket. I'm presuming that that's a light meter. Are you a photographer? I asked. Almost, he replied. I'm studying photography at Tech. This is my last year. I'm doing work experience at a studio in North Sydney for the next few months to get some practical training. Learning anything at the studio? I inquired casually. A lot. In the school we use 35mm for most of our assignments, but in the studio they let me use a real camera, an RB67. That's a Mamiya RB67, he said. What do you mean a real camera? What's wrong with the 35mm one you're using now? I asked with more than a little curiosity. Professional photographers have to use bigger cameras to get good reproduction quality. The pictures are better, he asserted as he lifted the Nikon to shoot a black cat sunning itself on a nearby wall. After a minute or so he turned back to me and continued, They are damned expensive. I'm going to have to borrow a lot of money to become a photographer. But you need to have the right gear to make it. I love 35mm. It's easy to use. It's like part of my vision. But that isn't what counts when you are a professional. Wow, people arguing about their equipment way back then. Anyway, been nice talking to you. Here's my bus. See you around. I wanted to hear more of this young man's twisted view of photography, but never had the chance. He just caught the bus to oblivion. We all seem to start our careers with 35mm format cameras. As we progress professionally, so does the size of our cameras. Eventually, however, we wake up and start thinking about where we are going. When I arrived in Australia 18 years ago, I was a dedicated 35mm shooter. I felt I could do anything on 35mm. And fortunately, it didn't take long for me to discover the reality of working in Sydney. Agencies dismissed 35mm as an amateur format, and the printing industry couldn't get any quality from a 35mm original anyway. I realised I was fighting an entrenched mentality, so I capitulated. I switched to 120 roll film cameras and have worked with them since. I've used them all. Blads, that's a Hasselblad, Mamiyas, Rollies and finally Pentax 645s, my favourite. They all produced good results and the client liked the film size. Even printers managed to get good results from the medium format. I was comfortable with the Pentax and used it for 7 years. It performed admirably. So what's the problem? My memory is the problem. You see, I always liked 35mm cameras. They were small, portable and quick handling. I liked to be able to take a photograph under any condition. I didn't want to use tripods or flash. I wanted to capture images. Armed with a couple of Nikons, some fast lenses and a sack full of Tri-X, I could record almost anything I ran into. Nothing but 35mm has ever been able to give me that capability and confidence. Recently I've had to make some tough decisions. I've done just about everything in photography and have settled into doing what I like best. I shoot travel stock, illustrate travel stories. I've written and write about photography. So I decided to return to 35mm because it performs perfectly for the areas I work in. Technology has removed most of the, of the professional barriers to a 35mm, and the remaining obstacles will disappear soon. Thanks to the digital revolution, it won't be long before a client never sees an original photograph. They'll all be digital in one way or another. Probably a good place to stop. Isn't that an interesting article? The arguments that go on about equipment. What's the best one? How many pixels should you have? What format should you use? Full frame, APS-C, medium format digital. The arguments all still go on. But my motto has always been, and I used to share this all the time, any picture taken is better than one that's not taken. So there you go. I'll probably come up with another one of my sayings later on. But once again, thanks for watching. I hope you found that interesting. And like if you like, subscribe if you wish, and I'll see you next time. See you later.